God is with you.
And also with you.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. John.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
Jesus said to the crowds, I myself am the living bread come down from heaven. If anyone eats this bread, he or she shall live forever. The bread that I will give is my flesh for the life of the world. At this, some of the Jews quarreled among themselves, saying, How can he give us his flesh to eat? Thereupon Jesus said to them, Let me solemnly assure you, if you do not eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. He who feeds on my flesh and drinks of my blood has life eternal, and I will raise him up on the last day. For my flesh is real food, and my blood real drink. The one who feeds on my flesh and drinks my blood remain in me, and I in them. Just as the Father who has life sent me, and I have life because of the Father, so the one who feeds on me will have life because of me. This is the bread that came down from heaven. Unlike your ancestors who ate and died nonetheless, the one who feeds on this bread shall live forever. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
In the name of our risen God. Amen. So, if you haven't suffered through part of my conversion story, you're about to suffer through it. But it's rather entertaining, just a touch long. I was raised a Congregationalist. Now there's two kinds of Congregationalists. There's the kind who belong to the United Church of Christ, and there's the kind who, when the United Church of Christ came together, said, no thank you, we'll remain completely independent. And I was raised in one of those completely independent Congregational churches. And I was raised there because my father didn't want his money going anywhere but to his church. So he was selfish. And so we had communion in the Congregational church very irregular. I don't remember if there was a pattern to it, because quite frankly, I, much like communion, attended the Congregational church very irregularly. But when you got into high school, you had to take 2 years of classes in order to be confirmed. And the first year you studied the Old Testament, and the second year you studied the New Testament. And because the New Testament is a bit more uplifting than the Old Testament, they made you come in on Saturday mornings to do that, so that you could have a little bit of negativity associated with your New Testament studies. And when you were in these confirmation classes, you had to be in church. And they made us sit up in the balcony, because kids were to be seen. Well, they still heard us up there, but I guess if you couldn't see us and you could hear us, that was okay. And for some reason, I don't know how it worked, but all through those 2 years, I was never present for communion. Now, I know they had it. Maybe it was a week we didn't have class, or I was sick or something. But it was only after I had graduated from high school that I was present for communion. And I went with the girl I was dating at the time. And when I used to tell this story, I used to have to explain what clogs were, but now that clogs are back, I don't have to do that. And we sat in the very last row of the balcony. And I don't remember really why we even went, but it turned out it was communion Sunday. And I always went to the 11 o'clock service, because that meant I could get the most sleep possible. I could get up at 20 to 11 and still make it to the 11 o'clock service. So as you can imagine, by the time the sermon was done, in this non-liturgical setting, where that was usually the point of the whole thing, and then they pass the plate and you go. By the time that was done, I was pretty hungry, and way down in the front I saw them get these trays that had bread on them. Now, foolishly in my youth, before I only realized this for the past several years actually, that you could buy Wonder Bread cubes for communion. I had pictures of these little old ladies of the church cutting the crust off of the bread, you know, and dicing it up. Somehow it stayed fresh, though, so maybe they did that. It wasn't like the prepackaged stuff I've had since. And when the bread all got around, you had to hold it on your hand and wait for your cup of juice. And so I'm salivating, just profusely, because I am so hungry, because 20 to 11 does not give you time to eat. It gives you time to brush your teeth, drag a brush through your hair, and get out the door. So the juice glass comes around, and we still had to wait. And by now, it's a wonder I didn't need a napkin. And so, without much fanfare, with nothing we would recognize as a Eucharistic prayer, the pastor said, "Take and eat." And so I went and I popped this into my mouth, but I think because I was salivating so profusely, I'm pretty sure it went into my mouth, but it disintegrated instantly if it did, and I was pretty certain I had launched it over my shoulder, off the back wall and down underneath my chair. He says, "Take and drink," so I drink the juice. My girlfriend crosses her legs, her clog flies off and goes bouncing down the stairs to the balcony to the front. I'm looking around for this bread, and I figured I must have eaten it because I couldn't find it, but I'm on my knees in front of the chair. And so here's the vision of communion I'm carrying forward now into adulthood. When I got to be in my early 20s and I was doing my obligatory church search, I was living in New England and I thought, well, most of my family are Methodist, so I'll go to the Methodist church. Now, the week before I had heard this joke about a faith healer. And I have faith healers in my family background, so I feel it's safe enough to tell this story. Traveling tent revival preachers and all that good stuff. Faith healer comes into a town, and he sets up a tent on the edge of town, and he puts up signs that he's having his meeting on Saturday night. Everybody comes, and he's the usual. If you've ever seen the Steve Martin movie, I think it's called Leap of Faith, it was pretty much that. It's an excellent movie. If you haven't seen it, you're going to enjoy it. And the time comes for the healings, and he calls people down. Anyone who needs healing, come on down. And two men come down to the front. One of them is walking with crutches, the kind with the holder for the forearm what people who have congenital problems generally use. And the other gentleman doesn't seem to have any problems physically at all. And they step up to the front, and the faith healer says to the first gentleman with the crutches, "Son, what's your name and what ails you?" And he says, "Well, my name is Fred, and I have congenital leg defects. I've had to use these crutches all my life." And he says, "Do you believe in Jesus?" And Fred says, "Yes." So he sends him behind this screen that's been set up. And the next gentleman comes up, and he says, "My name is Bob, and I have a speech impediment." He says, "Bob, do you believe in Jesus?" And Bob says, "Yes." And he sends him behind the curtain. And he gets the crowd all worked up into a frenzy. And he says, "Fred, throw out your crutches." And the crutches come sailing over the curtain. And he says, "Bob, speak to us." And Bob says, "Fred fell down." So now I hear this joke, and 5 days later I'm in this little Methodist church.